Hi there. Tonight we slip into the dim, smoky world of medieval village life, a place of creaking floors, low ceilings and secrets stuffed under straw mattresses. Your body is tired, your feet are cold, and yet your thoughts are loud. You're not in your bed, not really. You're somewhere in between. Maybe you're nestled beneath a too warm blanket, or maybe you're tucked into a couch with a familiar hum in the background. Wherever you are, welcome back. You've found a safe little window in time, one where you get to drift, not just into sleep, but into story. That story tonight, it's all about the things no one told you about medieval marriage, especially if you were a woman. And before you assume you've heard it all before, just wait. There's a lot beneath the surface here. You're about to see the kind of night that made some women wish the feast had never ended and the morning sun would never rise. Because this isn't just a wedding night. It's a reckoning. And by the way, before we go any further, if you enjoy sliding into sleep alongside history's forgotten corners, leave a little light on for me. Tap that like button or subscribe if it feels right. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time the stars showed up where you are. I love knowing where in the world this sleepy little village has stretched its borders. Now go ahead and settle. Maybe turn the lights down. Maybe turn the fan on. Let's take a deep breath together and exhale the world. Because this isn't just boring history, it's bedtime history. You crouch beside the fire in the one-room cottage you've known your whole life, poking at the low burning flame with a bent iron stick. The smoke from damp wood clings to your hair, mixing with the sour, sweet smell of boiled onions and wet wool. It's late, but you're not in bed. You're still dressed, still upright, still stiff with something that isn't quite dread but isn't far from it either. The next time the sun rises, you won't belong to this cottage anymore. You won't be your father's daughter, or your mother's burden, or even your little sister's bedtime storyteller. You'll be a wife. And tonight, the night before your wedding night, you don't feel lucky. You feel watched. You feel like the village walls are leaning inward, whispering. You feel like even the floorboards beneath your bare feet are preparing to give way. Because this isn't just a transition. It's a transaction. Outside, the April air is heavy with the damp promise of spring, and the thatched roof drips a slow rhythm of meltwater down the eaves. You can hear the last of the wedding singers staggering home from the alehouse. If they're singing for you, it's not out of joy. It's to fill the silence. Everyone knows what happens tomorrow. Everyone has their version of how you'll look, what you'll wear, whether you'll cry, or worse, stay silent. They've already placed bets on your expression, on his behavior, on how soon the midwife will be called. No one asks how you feel. That's not part of the tradition. You pull your shawl tighter around your shoulders, but it does nothing for the unease creeping across your skin like a second layer of linen. The fire cracks. Behind you, your mother is sorting through cloth for tomorrow. Your father snores unevenly in the corner. Your little sister has curled up next to the goat again, dreaming of your wedding cake. Never mind that there won't be one. There are no cakes at peasant weddings. No lace veils, no satin shoes, no nervous laughter over champagne flutes. There's barley stew bread that's half chaff, and a wreath of weeds gathered from the hedgerow, woven into your hair like a crown you didn't ask for. You'll wear the same shift you wore to the spring fair, newly patched at the seams. The wedding itself will happen in the church's shadowy nave, not even inside. The priest will scold more than he blesses. And then there's the bedding. You know about it. Everyone does. You've seen it happen to your cousins, your neighbor's daughter, even the girl who used to catch frogs with you in the stream, before her mother taught her to sew and her eyes stopped meeting yours. They bring the bride to the marriage bed like a lamb to the pen, sometimes cheered, sometimes jeered, always watched. Tomorrow night there will be no locked door, no quiet candlelight, no whispered words. There will be laughter, the clink of mugs, maybe a chant or two. If you're lucky, he'll be too drunk to bother. If you're unlucky, he'll want to make a point to the crowd, to his brothers, to himself. You stand, brush crumbs off your apron, and look toward the wooden door. Outside is the village you've known since before you had teeth. Inside is the family that bartered you away in exchange for a strip of hayfield, a borrowed cow, and a prayer. This is what marriage means here. It's not about love, it's about survival. And even then, not yours. The truth is, most people won't remember your name in 5 years. You'll be the miller's wife, or the one with the crying baby, or maybe the one whose stew always tastes burnt. You're a placeholder, a function, a role filled. Your feelings don't enter into it. You walk to the corner of the room and sit on your straw pallet. It crunches beneath you some of last season's grain husks, mixed in with the bedding again. The goat stirs beside your sister but doesn't wake. From the rafters above, dried onions swing like forgotten bells, whispering of dinners you'll soon be cooking for someone who never learned your favorite food. You pull your feet up, wrapping your arms around your knees. You won't sleep tonight. Not really. You think about running, but where the next village is 2 days' walk. The forest is full of wolves. And even if you made it, someone would trade you again, maybe for less. You're not the first girl to sit in this spot on this night staring into a fire that refuses to go out. And you won't be the last. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters. The embers in the hearth sigh and shift. Somewhere beyond the thatch, the moon hangs low, pale as bone. You imagine it watching you. You wonder if it watched your mother, and your grandmother, and the girls before them. You wonder if they were afraid. You wonder if they learned to live with it. And most of all, you wonder if fear is something that eventually leaves you, or just becomes another part of your body, like your name or your silence. Morning comes early in the village, but the gossip arrives even earlier. By the time you've carried your second bucket from the well, you've already caught fragments of at least 4 conversations about your impending wedding. None of them include your name, not directly, but they're unmistakably about you. She's marrying the miller's boy, someone mutters near the bread oven. Poor girl. You keep your eyes down, focus on the stones beneath your feet, and pretend you didn't hear. The wooden handle of the bucket bites into your fingers as you shift your grip. The well water sloshes cold and indifferent. You grew up on this dirt path. You've stepped barefoot across it during summers, raced through it, chasing geese, fetched firewood through snow thick enough to bury your ankles. But today the air feels different, thicker, like the world has conspired to remember all your most vulnerable parts. The village women don't hide their glances, and the older men smirk just enough for it to feel like a threat. If your marriage is a milestone, it's not yours alone. It's the village's business now. Your story belongs to them, and they will tell it the way they please. You pass the baker's hut. Smoke billows out in lazy swirls, and you catch sight of 2 women, elbows dusted with flour, grinning. Hope she knows what she's getting, one says. The other answers with a wink. He's not known for patience. Your ears burn. You don't stop walking. In a place with no doors that lock, privacy is a rumor. You've heard the girls talk when they think no one is listening, about what to expect, what to endure, what to fake. One of them said it's best to lie still and imagine you're elsewhere. Another said she screamed once, and her mother slapped her for the shame of it. You were 12 when you first overheard such things. You haven't forgotten. What no one says out loud, but everyone implies, is that your marriage is not about you. It's about the land your father traded. It's about keeping your family fed through winter. It's about your groom's mother getting another pair of hands in the kitchen. You are not a bride. You are leverage, a guarantee, a symbol of a deal sealed over muddy ale and old debts. You walk past the tannery where the stink of hides makes your stomach turn. It's always been a foul place, but today it seems worse. Maybe because today you're more aware of every discomfort, every assault on your senses. The flies buzz louder. The mud feels deeper, and your thoughts churn with a heaviness that sticks like soot. Reaching the edge of the village square, you pause. The bucket is full, but your arms tremble. Not just from weight, but from knowing every eye is drawn to your shoulders, your hips, your downcast gaze. They're imagining you tonight. Not your vows, not your smile, just the bed. You're not stupid. You know that weddings here are less ceremony and more spectacle. The bedding ritual alone is proof of that. But what surprises you is how much the village seems to enjoy it. It's entertainment, their evening diversion, while they chew barley stew and lick fat from their fingers. They'll be laughing about you. Will she cry? Will he brag? Will they hang the sheets? There's a saying passed among the women. If the chicken doesn't cluck, the rooster makes her. It's meant as humor. You no longer find it funny. You arrive back at the cottage breath ragged. Your mother's already inside muttering about onions, and how the stew must stretch for 12 guests. She doesn't ask how you are. She reminds you to fetch kindling before noon, and not to forget your manners. Smile, she says. No one wants a sour bride. You nod because it's easier. In medieval Europe, especially in rural communities, weddings were rarely about affection. By the 13th century, the Catholic Church had elevated marriage to a sacrament, making it spiritually binding but not necessarily emotionally kind. A marriage might bind you to heaven, yes, but it also chained you to the expectations of landowners, family elders, and hungry mouths. And yet, despite all this weight, your wedding is treated like a cause for celebration. The men are already drinking. The children are playing bride and groom with 2 rag dolls and a twist of hay. Even the goat seems unusually smug. You feel invisible and too visible at once, like a ghost that everyone's preparing a chair for. You sit on the stoop and watch a beetle crawl across the threshold. It climbs a splinter of wood teeters, then vanishes into the shadows. You envy it. It has places to hide. All you have is a scratchy shift, a too loud village, and the dread that tonight your body becomes a stage. Nearby, a group of older women is preparing herbs. One of them sees you and waves. "We're making the bridal bundle," she chirps. You nod. You don't know what that means. You don't ask. You remember hearing once when you were small enough to still climb trees that some women in the next county believed stepping into marriage barefoot meant eternal obedience. Others whispered that tripping at the altar spelled infertility. You wonder if that's why your mother insisted on stuffing those worn leather shoes with straw. Not for comfort, but protection. Or maybe she's just doing what was done to her. Historians still argue whether such superstitions had real reach, or were just regional quirks, but in your case, belief doesn't matter. The pressure does. Every pebble on the path to the church feels like a test. Every glance is a warning. Back inside, the house is louder now. Your aunt has arrived and is already fussing over the bread. Your sister chases the goat, giggling. Your father complains about the stool that needs mending, pretending he hasn't noticed you've gone quiet. You want to disappear to fold into the firewood pile, or slip behind the curtain where your mother dries herbs. But there is no such luxury. Later, as the sky begins to darken again and the windows are shuttered for supper, you'll find yourself surrounded by people you've known since birth, laughing, clapping, clinking cups. And you'll wonder how they can smile so easily when they know what's coming for you. But for now, it's still daylight. The village hums. The stew boils. And you carry the weight of a night that hasn't yet begun but already haunts you. The church bell rings at midday, slow and sonorous, each toll folding into the next like ripples in thick broth. You pause mid-step, half a pile of firewood in your arms, and close your eyes for a moment. It's not prayer that stirs in you, just a kind of muscle-deep weariness that echoes back through every wedding you've watched, every sermon you've heard, every moment a man in robes lifted his voice to speak for God, and never once asked what God thought of you. Your wedding is tomorrow, but today you must present yourself to the priest. Not for confession exactly, but something that feels like inspection. He'll ask questions in his raspy Latin, and you'll be expected to nod and murmur assent, even if you don't understand half of it. The real point isn't comprehension. It's obedience. It's appearance. It's the comfort of structure for those who sit higher in it than you ever will. Your mother tugs your arm and hands you a bundle of wilted flowers tied in a bit of twine. "For the altar," she says. You glance down. Yellowed chamomile, a drooping sprig of thyme, and what might have once been a violet. It smells faintly of mildew, like the marriage bed's been wrapped up in this offering, before you even step into it. You trudge to the church, your feet slipping on the muddy lane. This building, imposing cold, far too large for your small village, looms like judgment carved in stone. You remember being 5, sitting cross-legged on the cracked flagstones inside, watching a goat wander in during Easter Mass. The priest didn't even flinch, just kept talking about purity, sin, and debt. The goat, ironically, was escorted out more gently than some girls were from their own weddings. By the time you reach the church door, your hands are trembling. You clutch the flower bundle tighter, its stems digging into your palms. The priest stands waiting his robes, dingy from years of use, his eyes sharper than you'd like. He doesn't smile. He doesn't need to. In nomine patris, he begins drawing you inside. The Latin washes over you thick and heavy. You're not here for understanding. You're here for submission. He begins with the ritual questions. Do you come to this marriage willingly? You nod. What else can you do? Do you accept the duties of a Christian wife? Another nod. Behind him, the light from a narrow window spills across the stone floor like a blade. It cuts between your feet, and for a moment you imagine stepping back out of it into shadow. But the priest is already turning the page in his worn book, and you know better than to interrupt. By the 13th century, the Catholic Church had formally declared marriage a sacrament, an unbreakable bond sanctioned not just by law but by God Himself. It meant that every wedding was a spiritual contract, not merely a legal one. This shift gave the Church massive influence over personal lives, including yours. Once married, a woman's body was no longer her own. It belonged to the union, to the vows, to God, which is to say, to her husband. One priest in your region even preaches that a wife who refuses her husband may sin as gravely as a thief. He doesn't say what happens when a husband raises a hand in anger. That's a different kind of silence. Obedience, the priest says now slowly, as if the word has weight. Fidelity. Fruitfulness. You wonder if that's what you are now, fruit waiting to be plucked. You force your face to remain still. He sprinkles a few drops of holy water over the flowers in your hand. Some of it hits your wrist, startlingly cold. Purity, he murmurs. You think about your friend Marin married last spring. She came back from her wedding night with a split lip and a silence so loud it still hasn't faded. The Church blessed her too. Historians still argue whether the Church's elevation of marriage to a sacrament in the Fourth Lateran Council of 1215 truly improved conditions for women, or merely tightened their chains. On one hand, it gave women a recognized status within the sacrament. On the other, it locked them into unions that could not be broken. A woman could be beaten, starved, neglected, but she could not leave. Not without risking her soul, her standing, or her children. The priest finishes his litany and raises his hand in blessing. You bow your head, though something in you flinches. Your flowers have begun to drip the water, pooling in your palm. You walk back through the nave, your footsteps echoing like questions with no answers. Above you, saints carved in stone stare down in eternal pity. You wonder if they ever wanted to say no, if they were ever asked. Outside again, the village seems louder, brighter. The sun has warmed the mud just enough to make it stick. You wipe your sandals against a stone and keep walking, the prayer still echoing in your ears. Your mother waits by the cottage gate, hands on her hips. "Well," she asks. You don't answer. You just hand her the flowers. They've begun to wilt already. The rest of the day passes in a blur of tasks. You gather kindling, knead dough, sweep the floor. You pause once watching your sister braid her doll's hair. She's singing some nonsense rhyme about marriage and harvest. It's meant to be sweet. It lands like a bruise. You've been told over and over that this is holy, that obedience is righteousness, that love isn't necessary, that a quiet wife is a blessed wife, and yet you feel none of that holiness. You feel contained, like a secret everyone agreed not to keep anymore. You sit on your pallet that night back aching from chores and stare at the crack in the wall above your bed. Moonlight seeps through it, silvering the rough wood. There is no choice here. Only ritual. Only rhythm. The church gives you words to say. The village gives you a role to play. Your family gives you a way. And in return, you give everything. You wake up to the sound of clucking. Not birdsong, not bells, just chickens, loud, insistent, unapologetic. Somewhere just outside your window, one of them has gotten into a scrap with the goat again, and neither is willing to surrender territory. You pull the wool blanket tighter over your head, but the sounds of morning seep in anyway. Today is the day, your wedding day. The word settles heavy on your chest, pressing against your ribs like an extra heartbeat. Downstairs, someone's already stoking the hearth. Your mother, probably. Maybe your aunt who arrived yesterday with a tongue sharper than her sewing needle. The air smells of leeks and damp straw, and soon it will reek of expectations. When you finally rise and step out into the common room, your father is seated at the bench near the door, speaking in low tones with two other men. You recognize the one with the stained tunic. That's your groom's uncle. The other you don't know. A cousin, maybe, or another pair of hands for the field. What matters is the thing resting between them on the table, a piece of parchment slightly curled at the corners, and a small pouch that clinks when it's shifted. They're not discussing flowers. They're settling the final terms. Your dowry. You've known about it vaguely. Whispers behind doors, coins that disappeared from the hearth jar, the best goat mysteriously sent on loan. But now it's here in plain view. It looks smaller than you imagined. Not a treasure chest. Just a cloth pouch and some promises. Your father nods, scratches an X onto the page, and offers a grunt of satisfaction. No one looks at you. In medieval Europe, a bride's dowry was often the most carefully calculated element of the marriage, sometimes more so than the match itself. Dowries might include land livestock tools, a small monetary payment, or even seasonal rights to water or timber. The practice extended across Christian, Jewish, and Islamic cultures of the period, varying in structure, but united in one principle: a woman's value was measurable in goods. Among peasants, dowries were rarely lush. Sometimes they included a single cow, a few hens, or a share in a communal mill. Occasionally, a particularly shrewd father might throw in winter firewood, or a promise of assistance at next harvest. Your dowry: a young goat, a bushel of barley, a patched iron cooking pot, and vague verbal agreements to help roof the new shed before winter. In other words, enough to marry you off, not enough to ensure kindness. The groom's uncle chuckles as he tucks the pouch into his belt. She'll work hard, he says. Got her mother's build. The men laugh. You don't flinch, but your hands curl into fists behind your back. Your mother appears with a bundle of linens and thrusts them at you. Try these, she says, like nothing just happened. The shift's new. Don't ruin it. You take the garments into the corner of the room where a hanging cloth offers a semblance of privacy. As you undress, you listen to the men finish their discussion. Something about the pig. Something about how much cider to bring. You could be a sack of barley for all the difference it makes. The shift smells of soap and starch. It scratches slightly at the seams. You tie it tight at the waist, the fabric bunching around your hips. The oversmock is coarser still, dyed a blotchy shade of green that might have once been cheerful. When you step back into view, the room quiets for a moment. Then your father grunts again, a sound of approval or relief, or indifference. You can't tell. You're sent to gather nettles for the soup. As you crouch by the fence line, fingers careful not to sting, you think about another girl in the village, Marla the miller's niece, who was bartered last fall for 2 pigs and a scythe. People still joke about it. She squeals like what she was worth, someone said once. You pretend you didn't hear it, but it's stuck. The ground is soft beneath your knees, the early spring rains having left behind a network of mud veins and trickling puddles. You wonder briefly what would happen if you just walked. Not ran, just kept walking. Past the hedges, through the woods, into the next village, and the one after that. How long before someone asked your name instead of your price? But you know the answer. You'd be caught, or worse, pitied. And pity in a world like this doesn't come with a place to sleep or a piece of bread. Historians note that dowry customs varied sharply depending on region and century. In some parts of medieval Europe, the dowry belonged solely to the husband's family. In others, parts of it could revert to the wife if she became widowed. In southern France, for instance, legal codes sometimes permitted widows to reclaim a portion of their dowry for remarriage, but only if no children had been born. Elsewhere, especially in rural England, there was no guarantee of anything returning to you alive or dead. Among the lower classes, the rules were flexible, twisted by need and survival. Sometimes a dowry was a goat, sometimes a girl, sometimes both. You return with a bundle of stinging nettles, your hands red with welts. Your aunt clucks her tongue when she sees your arms. Careless, she mutters. Don't let the groom see that. She doesn't ask if it hurts. That evening you sit on the low bench, while the stew boils the air thick with tension disguised as routine. The pot bubbles, the fire crackles, and your life is being portioned out like meat, one ladle at a time. Your younger brother sings tunelessly in the corner while stacking bits of dry bark. He has no idea what this day means. The bride in his mind is something between a fairy tale and a joke. You wish you were either. Your mother takes you aside before bed. She hands you a kerchief and a worn wooden comb. Don't embarrass us, she says. And remember, be still no matter what. You hold the comb in your hand long after she's gone. The wood is smooth from years of use, its teeth worn uneven. You wonder how many women brush their hair with it on nights like this, nights when they were no longer daughters, but not yet wives. Just bodies suspended in a transaction too ancient to name. After the stew is eaten and the embers collapse into ash, your family drifts into uneasy sleep. Your father snores. Your sister talks to herself in her dreams. You lie awake, comb in hand, and listen to the house breathe. Somewhere beyond the thatch roof, the moon is full. It lights the grass like ghost breath. You wonder if it ever shines on a girl who doesn't feel sold. You pull the scratchy blanket to your chin and try not to cry. Not because crying is weak, but because it would make it real. You're not ready for it to be real. Not yet. Not when there's still a little bit of girl left inside you. A girl who used to make up stories. Who sang to frogs. Who wasn't a dowry, not yet. But by morning, that girl will be gone. You're up before the sun, and so is the rest of the house. Not because anyone's eager, but because weddings like harvests or funerals demand an early start. The air inside the cottage hangs heavy with smoke steam and the nervous clatter of preparation. Even the goat seems to sense something is off. It bleats from its corner stall, agitated as your aunt hurries past, with a basin of water sloshing over the edge. Before you've had a sip of broth or a bite of bread, your mother leads you outside to the edge of the woods. "We'll do it here," she says curtly. Behind her, 3 other women follow your aunt, your cousin Rena and old widow Tom, who delivered half the village, and once swore she watched a man get struck by lightning while holding a duck. You'd laugh, but there's no air for laughing today. They build a curtain from sticks, and a torn linen sheet propped between 2 saplings at the stream. It's not privacy. It's ceremony. Your dress is stripped off without ceremony. You're left bare in the chilly air, clutching your elbows while the women cluck and mutter about bruises and calluses. She's got farmhand's skin, one says. Strong at least offers another. They aren't cruel exactly, just indifferent, like bakers assessing dough. Then comes the washing. The water is icy, fetched straight from the stream. A rag soaked in rosemary and thyme is dragged across your back, your arms, your legs. You shiver violently, but they keep scrubbing. This isn't about cleanliness, it's about transformation, turning the farm girl into a bride, turning skin into something symbolic. You wonder if a lamb feels this way the night before slaughter. In many parts of medieval Europe, bridal bathing rituals were passed down from older women, blending Christian purity rites with older folk traditions. It was believed that certain herbs, lavender, juniper, marjoram, could ensure fertility or ward off misfortune. In wealthier homes, perfumed oils were applied to the skin. In peasant villages like yours, it's cold water, crushed mint, and a few whispered phrases about behaving well in bed. Your hair is combed until your scalp stings, then braided with dried daisies. Not fresh ones, it's too early in spring. The ones from last year's harvest, brittle and faded. Good enough, your aunt says. Men don't notice flowers anyway. Then they dress you in the ceremonial undershift. It's stiff from starch and smells faintly of old smoke. Over it goes the wedding dress, the green one your cousin wore last year, taken out of the chest, let out at the seams. It still doesn't quite fit. You suck in your stomach as the ties are pulled tight. Stand up straight, widow. Tom barks. You don't want to look like a sack. You're handed a string of cheap beadswood, not glass, and told to hold them like a rosary. You clasp them in both hands and stare at the knots in the wood. One bead is cracked. Another is sticky with something sweet. You say nothing. The preparation goes on. Your mother inspects you from head to toe, lips, tight fingers twitching to adjust something. You'll do, she says at last. That's the closest thing to a compliment you'll get today. You're led back into the cottage where your father eyes you for a long moment. You look like your mother did, he says finally. It's not affectionate. It's resigned. The rest of the village is starting to gather outside. Children are kicking stones. Dogs sniff at the fire pit. Someone's already passed around a skin of ale, and a group of young men is laughing too loud. You hear your groom's voice among them louder than the rest, and already slurred. Your stomach turns. Back inside, the women buzz around you, adjusting the dress, pinching your cheeks, muttering prayers. Widow Tom presses a sprig of mugwort into your palm. For protection, she says. Don't drop it. Scholars still debate how much of these practices came from religious influence versus deep-rooted superstition. Some argue that bridal cleansing was a holdover from pagan fertility rites, reinterpreted through a Christian lens. Others see it as social theater, an orchestrated act of purification for the sake of appearances. But for you, it's just cold water, bruised herbs, and a growing sense that your body is no longer your own. You sit on the stool near the hearth as your aunt fusses with the hem of your dress, and your cousin sings a wedding chant that sounds more like a dirge. You wonder if they remember what this feels like, or if they ever felt anything at all. A rooster crows. The village bell rings. The moment has come. You're handed a cup of broth to sip, supposedly to calm your nerves. It scalds your tongue. You drink it anyway. Then you rise, shoulders, stiff hands clenched around your beads and mugwort, and step outside to the waiting eyes of everyone you've ever known. The air is damp and smells of moss and peat. Someone cheers. A dog barks. The world does not pause for you. It simply watches as you walk slow and silent toward the next thing you cannot control. And for all the scrubbing and scouring, the dressing and combing, nothing feels different. You are not transformed. You are not radiant. You are a girl in a borrowed dress with nettle welts on your hands and a prayer you don't believe in whispering through your teeth. You are ready because you must be, and that will have to be enough. The feast begins before the ceremony even ends. It always does. By the time you and your new husband stand stiffly outside the church, the village green is already filling with the clamor of celebration. Clay jugs passed from hand to hand, hunks of rye bread, and smoked sausage disappearing into toothless mouths. Children shrieking as they chase each other in circles. Dogs snapping up scraps with gleeful precision. You are escorted through it all like a reluctant queen at a parade no one asked her to enjoy. Your dress feels heavier now, sagging with the damp of morning fog and the weight of eyes. Every corner you turn, someone raises a mug. To the bride they shout. You nod and smile like your jaw isn't aching from effort. You're not allowed to sit yet. There's a specific order to this: prayers, then toasts, then food, then whatever comes next. You catch the eye of your friend Ilsa at the edge of the crowd. She winks and mouths something like breathe, though it could also be brace. You don't ask which. Eventually a rough bench is cleared near the fire pit, and you are led there where your husband waits with an expression caught somewhere between boredom and hunger. He doesn't speak to you, not yet. His friends are clustered around him already half drunk. One of them slaps your groom on the back and says, "She'll fatten up by winter," as if you're a hog that's just been traded at the fair. You sit down and fold your hands in your lap, trying to ignore the sting in your palms, where the mugwort sprig left a greenish stain. A bowl of stew is placed in front of you, its surface congealing slightly. You're not hungry. All around you the celebration escalates. Musicians arrive, 2 fiddlers and a man with a set of cracked drums. They launch into a lopsided tune and the crowd whoops in response. Someone brings out a small roasted pig. Apples shoved in its mouth, eyes closed like it died mid-thought. It's a strange kind of mercy. In medieval peasant weddings, the feast served less as a moment of intimacy and more as a community spectacle. The village participated because the village had to the marriage was not simply a union between 2 people, but between families, fields, and social obligations. The richer the feast, the stronger the alliance appeared, even if it was only showbread and illusions. You are allowed a cup of watered-down ale. It tastes like rust and moss. You sip slowly. Children crawl beneath the tables. An old man begins to sing something about harvest and fertility, the words blurred by cider. A piglet runs loose, chased by 3 shrieking toddlers. You smile at none of it. Your mother appears beside you and adjusts your veil for the 5th time. "You look tired," she whispers. You are. Smile more. You try. It doesn't land. Your new husband finally addresses you. "You all right?" he asks, voice low but not gentle. You nod. He grunts and turns back to his friends. More food arrives: cheese, barley cakes, dried apples. None of it touches your stomach. Instead, you think of a line you heard once in a sermon, something about becoming one flesh. You try not to imagine what that means tonight. Then comes the dancing. Someone grabs your hand, maybe Rena, maybe Ilsa, and pulls you to your feet. You stumble through the steps you've known since childhood, muscles moving on memory. Clap, spin, step turn. You remember doing this barefoot in the summer when you were 10, your knees skinned and your smile real. Now your feet ache inside borrowed shoes, and every spin makes your vision blur just a little more. At some point, your groom joins the dance. He is clumsy but eager, gripping your waist, with hands too warm, laughing too loudly. His breath smells of onions and beer. He misses every 3rd beat, but no one minds. It's his day after all. Eventually, the music slows. The fiddlers take a break. The crowd quiets just a little. You are led back to your seat. Someone hands you a sweet honey wrapped in a fig leaf and whispers, "To sweeten the night." You tuck it into your sleeve and pretend you'll eat it later. Historians still argue whether medieval peasant women experienced joy on their wedding days, or merely relief. Relief that the dowry was paid, that the union was approved, that the night would pass quickly and the bruises would fade. Some accounts hint at happiness, shared smiles, true affection, laughter under lanterns. But those accounts are rare, and usually written by men. The sky begins to dim. Shadows stretch across the village green. Torches are lit. Someone starts another song. Your brother trips over a dog and knocks over a cider jug. Laughter erupts. For a moment, it almost feels like something real. Then someone shouts, "Time for the bedding." And just like that, your stomach knots. You stand when they tell you to. You walk when they guide you. And all around the crowd follows, eager and tipsy, shouting things you wish you didn't understand. The feast was never about you. Not really. It was about showing the village that you were properly prepared, properly scrubbed, properly traded, properly owned. You were the centerpiece, the decoration, the prize roast. And now that the feast is done, it's time to carve. The priest's voice booms off the chapel walls, though his tone is more weary than majestic. You stand beside your husband, your fingers cold and stiff within your sleeves, listening as the words tumble out like a warning cloaked in Latin. He reads from the book of Tobit, as is tradition in your parish. Something about Sarah and Tobias, about faith, about demons, being driven out by prayer and fish gall. You wonder vaguely if anyone's ever tried that on a real husband. The priest raises his hand in benediction and mutters a final, "Amen." The crowd mumbles along, half sober, half listening. The service is mercifully short, but the moment stretches unbearably long. You and your husband are now joined in the eyes of God. But God notably doesn't seem to be watching. As you turn to walk back down the aisle, your husband's arm brushes yours. He doesn't take your hand. That might look soft, sentimental. This isn't about love. It's about legitimacy. In medieval Europe, the church oversaw not just the sanctity of marriage, but its legality. By the 12th century, ecclesiastical law had evolved to include formal vows spoken aloud before witnesses, followed by consummation. Without both elements, a marriage might not be recognized. You could be bound for life or find your union annulled, depending on whether a priest had witnessed your promise or your bedding. You step out into the cool twilight, and the wind hits your face like a slap. The village green is quieter now. The feast has tapered into embers. The drunkards are slumped against trees, and the fiddlers are gone. A few children still dart between fire pits, but even they seem hushed. The mood has shifted. The joy, if it ever existed, has curdled into something else. A procession forms, an informal one, led by your husband's friends and cousins. They jeer and laugh, tossing barley at your feet. You're escorted like a prize through muddy lanes, past shuttered windows, and leaning fence posts toward the small cottage that will now be your home. Your mother isn't among them. Neither is your father. They stayed behind. Their job is done. Someone's tied a dead rabbit to the doorframe, a crude fertility symbol or a joke. You don't ask which. You just step inside. The interior is sparse. One bed, one bench, one hearth. A small window near the rafters leaks orange light from the setting sun. You stand there for a moment, frozen, unsure of where to go. Then the door opens behind you and the crowd piles in. Yes, this part is real. The bedding ceremony. In some regions of medieval Europe, especially in rural communities, bedding the couple was not a private affair. Friends, family, neighbors, even local officials would crowd into the bridal chamber, singing bawdy songs, making crude jokes, and sometimes physically undressing the bride and groom. In wealthier circles, the tradition was more symbolic. Escorts might lead the couple to the bed place, their hands together, then leave. But among peasants, there was little pretense. The goal was to ensure the marriage would be consummated, immediately, visibly. You are led to the bed like a lamb to the altar. Your shoes are removed. Your veil is pulled aside. A woman you don't know tugs the ribbons at the back of your gown, loosening the fabric while humming a tune you've never heard. Someone else pours ale and hands your husband a mug. He drinks deeply, says nothing. The crowd laughs. Someone throws a handful of dried flowers. Someone else tosses a crude joke. Hope she's got more fight than her goat. Your cheeks burn. Finally, the priest steps forward, not the same one from the chapel, but a younger man who smells faintly of mead. He mumbles a blessing over the bed, splashes a few drops of water near the headboard, and says, "May your union be fruitful." Then the room empties slowly, grudgingly. One by one, the guests file out, each tossing a last comment or leer as they go. "Don't break the bed," someone says. "Don't forget to pray," another adds, laughing. And then the door closes. Silence. You and your husband stand a few feet apart, unsure of what comes next. He scratches the back of his neck, suddenly shy. The bravado of the feast has worn off, and in its place is an awkward, heavy quiet. You sit on the edge of the bed, not looking at him. He leans against the wall. You don't speak. Some marriages began like this, two strangers, forced into intimacy by law, religion, and the rhythm of the agricultural year. Others began with kindness, a shared loaf of bread, or a whispered joke. But not tonight. He approaches slowly, not cruelly, but without tenderness, like someone fulfilling a duty. He places a hand on your shoulder. It is warm and heavy. Outside, the village settles into sleep. A dog barks, an owl cries, the fire crackles low in the hearth. You close your eyes and wish for morning. Historians still debate the nature of consent in medieval marriages. Canon law technically required both parties to agree to the union, but in practice, especially among the peasantry, pressure from family and community often overrode individual will. Some records suggest that brides could refuse to say their vows. Others hint that refusal was merely symbolic, an expected show of modesty before submission. You said yes, or something like it. That was enough for everyone else. You lie still beneath the wool blanket, staring at the wooden beams above you, counting knots in the grain. 1, 2, 3. Outside, the stars wheel overhead. A new name has been sewn into your life, whether you asked for it or not, and now there is no going back. You wake before dawn, though you barely slept. The fire has long since died, leaving the cottage chilled and damp. The wool blanket feels heavier than it did the night before, and your limbs ache with a soreness that doesn't come from labor. You lie there for a while, eyes wide open in the darkness, your husband snoring beside you, mouth slack and body curled away. His back is turned as if nothing ever happened. Eventually you rise quietly, wrap your shawl around your shoulders and step outside. The village is still sleeping. Smoke curls from only a few chimneys, and the morning mist clings low over the thatch roofs like a second skin. You walk toward the edge of the green, careful not to make noise, your boots soft in the wet grass. There you sit on a flat stone near the well, rubbing your hands together for warmth. You stare out across the fields where mist rises over the barley shoots. You're married now, legally, spiritually, economically. Your name may not change, but everything else has. You touch your collarbone, tracing the line where the dress had pinched. You wonder what today will bring more washing. A visit from your mother-in-law, instructions on how to manage his mother's chickens. You wonder more pressingly if anyone expects you to smile. You are no longer the girl who watched the world from a cottage window. You are the woman who was marched through it. In many parts of medieval Europe, a bride's duties began immediately after the wedding night. There was no honeymoon, no rest. A new wife would be expected to manage a household, contribute labor, to the fields produce heirs, and integrate fully into her husband's kinship network. In fact, many women didn't move far, just to the next farm over, but the social shift was enormous. You are now part of a new unit, whether you liked it or not. A rooster crows. The village begins to stir. You hear carts creaking over stones and distant bleats from the pasture. A woman calls out to her daughter. A boy chases a chicken. Life continues indifferent to your transformation. You make your way back to the cottage and step inside. Your husband is still asleep, mouth slightly open, one foot sticking out from under the blanket. The room smells of smoke and sour ale. You move quietly, stacking kindling by the hearth. folding the extra blanket, tucking your hair into a kerchief. It's all familiar movements you've done 1,000 times, but it feels different now, as if every action is being observed by invisible judges. You're not alone in this sensation. In many medieval communities, a new bride was closely watched after her wedding, by her husband's mother's sisters, even village elders. Her competence, cleanliness, and compliance were measured daily. A burned loaf could be gossiped by noon. A bruise could be dismissed as clumsiness or curiosity. Depends who's telling the story. You ladle water into a clay cup and sip slowly. It tastes of moss and iron. There's no rush. No one has come to fetch you. Yet. Outside, the village bell tolls. Not for you, just for time. The rhythm of the day has begun. You take a slow breath and lean against the doorframe, watching the mist dissolve. There's a strange peace to it. Not hope exactly, but a pause. A moment where nothing is expected yet. And then it comes. A knock at the door. It's your mother-in-law. She pushes past you, arms full of linens. "Start washing," she says without looking. "You'll need these ready by Sunday." You take the pile with both hands, nod and bite your tongue. The cloth smells faintly of mildew. She glances at the bed at her son still snoring. Her mouth twitches into a smirk. "Looks like he slept well," she says. You say nothing. She leaves. You sit with the linen staring at the weave of the cloth, the faint stains that never came out from the last wedding. You trace one with your thumb, wondering whose story it belonged to. Historians still argue whether medieval brides were passive victims of their time, or agents navigating within limited roles. Some women found ways to exert power through household management, through midwifery, through careful influence over sons and husbands. Others were crushed by the weight of their new identities, unable to bend or breathe beneath them. You don't know which kind you'll be. Not yet. You rise, shake out the linens, and head toward the stream. The water is cold as always. The rocks slippery, but your hands know what to do. You scrub. Not just the stains, not just the fabric, but the weight of yesterday, the feel of the eyes, the words no one said but everyone heard. You scrub until your fingers go numb. Then you wring the cloth out one piece at a time and hang it to dry over the hedge. The sun is higher now, and the mist is gone. Children's laughter rings through the village. The world has moved on. You return to the cottage light. The hearth stir the coals and begin again. This is your life now. But somewhere behind your breastbone, a quiet thought flutters like a moth in a jar. Maybe it doesn't have to stay this way forever. Maybe not today. Maybe not this year. But someday. The morning mist clears, but the darkness that once covered the world lingers in stories, records, and tree rings. Long before you were ever born, long before any church bells rang across your village, there was a year without light. A year when the sky grew dim, the sun refused to shine, and people thought the world might be ending. It was the year 535 AD, and something had gone terribly wrong. Across the Byzantine Empire, scribes wrote of a strange, unending gloom. The sun gave forth its light without brightness, one historian wrote, like the moon during the whole year. Crops failed. Snow fell in summer. People panicked, and rightly so. For nearly 18 months, the earth seemed cloaked in a veil of cold gray silence. What caused it? Historians and climate scientists now believe that a massive volcanic eruption, possibly Mount Krakatoa in what is now Indonesia, unleashed an ash cloud so vast, it wrapped the globe in shadow. It wasn't just the eruption's blast, but the sulfur and ash it pushed into the stratosphere, blocking sunlight and triggering years of cooling. Some believe it marks the start of what came to be called the late antique Little Ice Age. You can imagine it, can't you? A medieval village like yours, but even earlier. Farmers waking to frost in midsummer. Mothers with no grain to grind children squinting at the sky, wondering why the days never seemed to brighten. The stars came out early. The crops came late. The hunger came quickly. What would you do if daylight failed? You might gather at the church and pray louder, or cling tighter to old folk charms whispering to the land for mercy. Perhaps the people of 535 did both, mixing psalms with pagan mutterings, desperate for warmth, for clarity, for food. The famine that followed killed millions. Droughts were reported in China. In Ireland, a mysterious failure of bread was recorded in the annals. Even the great city of Constantinople grew quiet, markets thinned, and the emperor's court took on an eerie stillness. Light had become a luxury, firewood a treasure. There are no bedtime tales about this time, no happy songs, just the cold, the gray, the hunger, and the fear. What scholars still debate is the scale of the eruption itself. Some suggest it was Krakatoa. Others think it may have been a massive volcanic chain. Ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica preserved the sulfuric fingerprints of the blast. But no single volcano has ever claimed certainty. The darkness remains in more ways than one. Yet something stirs in the aftermath. After the worst of the cooling, new patterns of life begin to emerge. Forests regrow where farms had failed. Survivors shift their calendars, alter their diets, adjust their rituals. The world did not end. It simply changed. You glance at your hearth fire as you listen to this story, and suddenly the warmth seems brighter. The sun beyond your window seems generous, not routine. You picture a girl like you long ago, standing in a shadowed field, her face turned upward, waiting for a sky that never clears. And you realize sometimes, history isn't about kings or battles. Sometimes it's about clouds, about nights that don't end, about hunger that stretches across empires. Sometimes it's about how we survive the dark. You're sitting in a quiet corner of your imagined medieval cottage embers, humming in the hearth and a chill coiling just behind the stones of the wall. Outside, a rooster stirs but doesn't crow. It's that hushed moment before the world picks itself up again. And as your eyes drift shut, lulled by the glow of fire and the soft scratch of wool on your skin, you're drawn slowly, almost dreamlike, into a world that once stood taller than any other. A world of marble columns, golden eagles, disciplined legions, and whispered conspiracies behind velvet curtains. Rome. But not the Rome you imagine from schoolbook glory, not the one of triumphant generals and roaring crowds in the Colosseum. No, this Rome is tired, faded, splintered like a bone that healed crooked, and the final blow comes not with a bang, but with a boy. His name is Romulus Augustulus, and he was barely a teenager. It's the year 476 AD. The once mighty Western Roman Empire is a shadow of its former self. For centuries the empire has been crumbling, not from one cataclysmic event, but from 1,000 tiny cuts. Corruption, civil war, economic collapse, and foreign invasions that stretched its military to a snapping point. Barbarians aren't at the gates. They're already inside, living in the villas, commanding the armies, marrying into old Roman families. By the time young Romulus is placed on the throne, nobody's fooled. He's not a ruler. He's a placeholder. His father, Orestes, is the real power behind the curtain, a seasoned military commander who installs his son more as a puppet than a prince. The boy's very name is an Echo Romulus, the mythical founder of Rome and Augustus, the first true emperor. It's symbolic, intentional, and doomed. You picture him, this boy emperor, not in a grand golden hall, but in a drafty, half-abandoned palace in Ravenna, the crumbling capital of a shrinking empire. The mosaics still gleam, but the courtiers are few. The robes are patched. The feasts are smaller. The empire still pretends it stretches from Britannia to North Africa, but in truth it's lost most of its limbs. The provinces are gone. The legions are thin. Even Rome itself, ancient eternal Rome, is just a ceremonial shadow looted by the Visigoths decades earlier, scarred and sullen. Then comes Odoacer, a Germanic chieftain, a general in the Roman army, charismatic, shrewd, and tired of waiting. When Orestes denies land to Odoacer's soldiers, something snaps. Odoacer marches on Ravenna, defeats Orestes in battle, and captures the young emperor. But instead of killing Romulus, he does something stranger. He lets him live. He deposes the boy with quiet formality, sends the imperial insignia eastward to Constantinople, and retires the title. No grand declaration, no ceremonial destruction, just a surrender of pretense. The Western Roman Empire, after nearly 5 centuries, ends not with a scream but a sigh. You wonder what that boy thought sitting in a cold room as strangers packed away the symbols of power. Did he cry? Did he understand? Did he try to cling to the marble pillars as they led him out? Or was he just relieved to no longer wear shoes, 2 sizes too big for the role he'd never grown into? He's given a villa, a pension. He disappears from the historical record. The empire disappears too. Mainstream historical fact confirms that the deposition of Romulus Augustulus marks the conventional end of the Western Roman Empire. Yet most scholars now agree that by the time of his removal, the empire was already functionally dead. What Odoacer ended was the illusion. The machinery had stopped turning long ago. It's fascinating, isn't it? That something so vast, so foundational could conclude so quietly. No flaming cities, no final battle, just a boy emperor replaced by a soldier who no longer cared for titles. And the people, they adjusted, because they had to. After the fall, Italy didn't collapse into chaos. Administration continued. Roads remained, though they slowly decayed. Grain still moved from field to town. Laws were enforced, albeit by different hands. Life in the post-Roman world became a patchwork of new rulers, old customs, and an aching nostalgia for order. That nostalgia would echo for centuries. The Holy Roman Empire, Charlemagne, the Renaissance, all would look backward, trying to reclaim what quietly slipped away. But if you'd been a peasant during that time, you might not have noticed any grand change at all. The tax collector might wear different colors, but he'd still knock on your door. The bishop would still preach in Latin. The harvest still had to come in, and the rain still came late. For most history doesn't announce itself. It just happens, and we adapt. Back in your cottage, the fire flickers. You run your hand along the grain of the table worn by years of elbows and candle wax. You think about Romulus, the boy who bore a world's name and shrugged it off like a too-heavy cloak. There's something haunting about it. Something comforting, too. Because it means the end of a world isn't always the end of everything. You rise, stretch, and pour another ladle of broth into your wooden cup. The broth is thin but warm. It does the job. You stare into its steam and imagine the boy emperor, all those centuries ago, warming his hands over a brazier as he watched courtiers pack away his throne. He was just a boy. He never expected to become the last. And history, it turns out, rarely needs applause to change the stage. You hear it before you feel it. Rain. Again. Not a summer shower, not the rhythmic tap of a passing cloud, but a relentless, unyielding drumbeat against thatch soil and bone. It's the kind of rain that sours grain in the field, that blackens bread dough, left too long on the windowsill. The kind of rain that doesn't wash away sin or sorrow. It simply soaks it deeper into the ground. It's May 1315, and it will rain for months. At first, no one panics. Rain is a fact of life, a blessing in moderation. Too much sun is worse, they say. Crops need water. But by June, the village paths are a slurry of mud. By July, your father is pacing in the barn, squinting up at rafters that drip even indoors. By August, the oat fields are stunted. The barley lies flat. And the wheat. The wheat never stood a chance. You've never seen adults this nervous. You remember the first bad harvest. There was silence at dinner, less bread on the table, Salted pork usually served in thick slabs shaved down to strips. Your mother said it would pass. "The Lord tests us," she whispered. But her hands were shaking when she said it. Then came the second bad harvest, and suddenly everything changed. The Great Famine of 1315, 1317 was not the work of war or plague. It was water, cold, constant, and cruel. Beginning with unseasonably heavy spring rains, much of northern Europe experienced crop failure on a catastrophic scale. Fields flooded, roads washed out, harvests rotted. And across the continent, hunger set in with claws and teeth. In your village, the signs were subtle at first. Less grain at market, eggs vanishing quickly, chickens kept behind doors instead of wandering freely. Your neighbors stopped offering milk. Another family slaughtered their goat early. And then, one by one, the dogs began to disappear. You don't want to ask. Even the nobles, those towering silhouettes of wealth and power, felt it. Their stores, larger but finite, dwindled. Their peasants, overworked and underfed, collapsed in the fields. Food prices tripled. And bread, the one constant, the one thing always promised, became rare. You remember the day your mother handed you a crust and said, "Eat slowly. There won't be more." You did. You chewed like it was gold. By the second winter, the hunger became something else. Not just a lack, but a presence. A pressure in your chest. A spinning in your head. People looked thinner, grayer. The priest stopped preaching about sin and started talking about patience. "The Lord gives, the Lord takes," he said. But it was harder to listen when your stomach screamed louder than his sermons. Then came spring and more rain. The ground couldn't absorb it. The rivers swelled. Grain mold bloomed across what few sacks remained. Even rats, once detested, became baited, hunted, cooked. You watched a woman, someone's aunt, boil grass in a pot and pretend it was stew. You didn't laugh. Mainstream historical accounts confirm that the Great Famine led to widespread starvation, disease, and social disruption. Chroniclers of the time spoke of bodies lining roadsides of theft, becoming necessity of cannibalism whispered about in hushed, horrified tones. Entire regions saw population declines. Children were abandoned. Elders were left behind. Families were broken by the simple math of survival. And still it rained. Scholars still argue about what caused the strange weather pattern. Some believe it was part of a larger climatic event, the early tremors of the Little Ice Age. Others suspect volcanic activity altering atmospheric patterns. But no one disputes the scale. Between 10 and 25% of the population in affected areas may have died. You remember the funeral bells ringing every other day? Not for war heroes, just neighbors, friends, infants who never cried, elders who didn't wake, a man who went into the woods and didn't return. When they found him, his face was turned to the sky, eyes open, mouth full of leaves. You began to dream of bread, not just taste it in your sleep, but smell it thick, warm, crusted with ash. You'd wake up with your fingers in your mouth, chewing nothing. People began to travel looking for food, for rumors of fields less wet. Roads became dangerous bandits. Sickness, desperation. You met a boy from 2 villages away who traded a wooden comb for a turnip. "I had sisters," he said, then walked away. The famine lasted 2.5 years. That doesn't sound like much. But count every meal you didn't have. Every day you woke up wondering what could be chewed, boiled, swallowed. Count every glance from a friend that felt too hungry. Every dream that ended with a crust. It is an eternity. And when the rains finally stopped, when the sun returned cautious and pale, the world wasn't the same. There were fewer of you. Fields lay fallow. Songs were quieter. Even festivals felt wrong, like the laughter was borrowed. Yet somehow the plow turned again. Barley sprouted. A child was born. A loaf was shared without a lie. And just as the land began to heal, the ships arrived. The year was 1347, and death came faster than ever before. But that's another story. You sip your broth. You press your palm against your belly full for now, and you say a quiet thanks to a field that grew something this season, because once not so long ago it didn't. You smell the harbor before you see it. Brine, rotting woodfish blood, and something sweeter, cloying, sticky wrong. The sun hasn't yet risen, but the dockhands already shout into the fog ropes, groaning as they pull another vessel ashore. You step closer, drawn not by curiosity, but by unease. There's a stillness to the ship that doesn't belong. It's 1347. You live in Messina, a bustling Sicilian port city, stitched together with market bells and gossip. The city swells with traders, pilgrims, and merchants. Ships arrive daily bearing wool from England, spices from the Levant, and silk from Byzantium. But this ship, this one doesn't move like the others. It slumps. The sailors don't disembark. No crates are lowered. No voices call out from above. The deck is quiet, too quiet. Then a single figure appears, skin, ashen eyes, wide mouth, moving without sound. He falls before he can descend the gangplank. You run. By the time the bells toll, it's already too late. The Black Death didn't arrive with thunder. It came on the tide tucked inside the bellies of merchant ships and the bloodstreams of rats. The most accepted origin theory today is that the plague bacterium, Yersinia pestis, was carried from the east along Silk Road trade routes, traveling from Central Asia to the Crimea, and then into Europe through maritime ports like Messina. And it moved fast. By the time local authorities quarantined the ship, the sickness had already slipped through the city's veins. It began with fevers, then chills, then the swellings, buboes they were called underarms, in groins black as coal tender to the touch. Death followed swiftly. 2 days. 3 if you were lucky. Some died within hours. You try to convince yourself it's isolated, that this ship was cursed. But by the week's end, people are collapsing in the markets. Children cough dark blood onto cobblestones. The city gates close, but death has no need for keys. Within months, the Black Death spreads like spilled ink. From Sicily to Genoa, from Marseille to Paris. Whole towns vanish. Clergy flee. Doctors refuse patients. Funerals are banned. Graves are dug too shallow. The living begin to fear each other, eyeing coughs like omens, crossing streets to avoid passing breath. You watch as neighbors burn rosemary in their homes, carry posies in pockets, and trace crosses on their doors. Some flagellate themselves in the streets, begging God for mercy. Others turn to vice, reasoning that death will come either way, better to face it with wine and song. But neither sanctity nor sin slows the spread. By the following year, 1348, it has reached London, Prague, and as far north as Norway. The plague devastates cities and rural villages alike. Scholars now estimate it wiped out between 30–60% of Europe's population in just 4 years. Entire families vanish. In some parishes, there's no one left to ring the bell. You leave a loaf of bread at your neighbor's door. It sits untouched. Days later, you find it moldy, half-eaten by mice, the door still barred from the inside. You never saw them again. Historians still argue whether the disease spread more through fleas on rats or via human-to-human contact, through pneumonic transmission. Most agree both forms occurred aided by poor sanitation, dense living quarters, and the sheer volume of trade that connected the medieval world like threads in a web. Once the web vibrated, the disease jumped unstoppable. Even the church feels powerless. Priests die as quickly as their parishioners. Monks flee monasteries. Some claim the plague is divine punishment. Others blame the stars, or Jews. Pogroms erupt across Europe, entire communities scapegoated, slaughtered or expelled in a desperate bid for control. You watch the town square transform from a marketplace into a fire pit. Books burn, so do bodies. Even memory seems fragile, and yet life clings. You wake one morning to silence, not the silence of death, but of absence. The coughing has stopped. The streets are empty. You venture out, clutching your rosary, half expecting the world to collapse beneath your feet. But the sun still rises. A blackbird sings. Somewhere someone bakes bread. You survived. But survival feels hollow. Every corner holds a ghost. Every song sounds thinner. You speak softer now, laugh less. But you are alive. Europe would take more than a century to recover from the Black Death. Labor shortages reshaped economies. Feudalism fractured. Cities restructured their sanitation and infrastructure. Art, too, changed, haunted by themes of mortality and decay. And science, though slow, began to question older truths. The plague never truly vanished. It returned in waves less ferocious, but never forgotten. But it changed how people understood life as fleeting, fragile, and strange. You kneel before your hearth and warm your hands. You think of the sailors on that first ship who never meant to bring such ruin. And you wonder if death could ride in on a whisper. What else might the tide carry hope, maybe? Someday. The courtyard smells of wet hay and fear. You push through the crowd, your eyes stinging from wood smoke, and your ears buzzing with murmurs. People have come from across the town. Peasants, merchants, monks. They press close together, yet no one speaks loudly. There's something sacred in the air, though no church bell rings. All eyes are fixed on the scaffold, on the girl, on the flames that haven't yet started, but already flicker in every mind. She's smaller than the legends make her out to be. No glowing armor or flaming sword, just a rough tunic, cropped hair chains at her ankles. But she stands tall, gaze level, as if daring the fire to come early. You wonder how someone who looks so ordinary could make kings tremble, armies kneel, and popes reconsider their power. Then you meet her eyes, and you know. Joan of Arc doesn't need armor. She is the flame. She was born in 1412 in Domremy, a quiet French village with more cows than people. No royal blood, no schooling, no path to greatness. But at age 13 she began hearing voices. She said they came from saints. Michael, Catherine, Margaret. They told her she had a mission to crown the rightful king of France and drive out the English. You try to imagine yourself at that age hearing such commands. You'd have hidden under your bed. Joan marched to war. At just 17, she convinced Charles VII, then the Dauphin, a disputed heir, to give her command of an army. She wore men's clothing, rode on horseback, and carried a white banner stitched with lilies and angels. She didn't fight with a blade, but with belief. Her very presence lifted sieges, restored morale, and bent history. The siege of Orléans broke in 9 days after she arrived. You can almost hear the bells they rang that spring, joyous and stunned. The records agree her victories weren't illusions. They shifted the war. Before her, France had been collapsing. After her, they rose. Even hardened generals admitted her leadership worked, though they scoffed behind closed doors at her divine claims. Still, she brought Charles to Reims, saw him crowned. That alone was a miracle. But miracles make enemies. You step closer to the scaffold. The executioner tightens the rope around her waist, anchoring her to the stake. A priest reads her sentence heresy, witchcraft cross-dressing. You feel heat creep into your neck, not from fire, but shame. Not for her, but for the ones condemning her. She looks out over the crowd and doesn't flinch. Just a girl who followed voices and was punished for not staying small. Captured in 1430 near Compiègne, she was sold to the English. Tried in Rouen under church authority, though the trial was political theater from the start. The bishops and inquisitors asked questions she wasn't trained to answer, mocked her visions, accused her of demonic possession. Her responses were measured humble, sometimes clever. When they asked if she believed herself in a state of grace, she replied, "If I am, may God keep me there. If I'm not, may He put me there." Even her enemies had to pause. The real issue, she wore men's clothes, to ride safely in war, to avoid assault in prison, to claim the space reserved for men. And that was the true heresy, not hearing voices, but daring to speak, not being possessed, but possessing power. Historians still debate whether the trial was more about politics than religion. Most agree it was both. A woman who crossed gender lines, military lines, divine lines, she couldn't be left alive. The firewood cracks. The smell of pitch rides the wind. Joan murmurs prayers in old French lips, moving steadily. You expect pleading. She offers praise. When the flames catch the base of the pyre, she does not scream. Her voice rises once, calling the name of Jesus. Then she is lost in smoke. You close your eyes, not out of fear, out of reverence. The city goes silent. No cheers, no laughter, no sermon. Just ashes carried by wind over a church that refused to hear her, over streets that will later name taverns after her, over rooftops where tonight children will dream of a girl in armor who never flinched. You walk home slowly, boots soaked with river dew, and remember her banner, Jesus Maria. It had been white-stitched by her own hand, fluttering like grace. You learned that her bones were thrown into the sand so no one could claim her relics. No shrine, no grave, only memory. But memory is stubborn. It clings. It echoes. Within decades, whispers grow louder she was innocent, wrongfully executed, not a witch but a martyr. Her second trial, ordered by Charles VII himself, posthumously clears her of all charges in 1456. You wonder what comfort that brings to a girl who never saw 20. Centuries later, the Church canonizes her. In 1920, Joan becomes Saint Joan of Arc. Statues rise across France. Cathedrals bear her likeness. Her name graces coins, stamps, even battle tanks. But you remember her not as an icon, not gilded, not distant. You remember the ash that clung to your cloak, the way the crowd had wept, the way she had stood, the quiet miracle of a girl who believed. You sit by your hearth and stare into your own flames. You think of her voice not raised in command but in prayer. You think of your own fears, how small they seem now. And you wonder if your path led to a pyre, would you have the courage to walk it anyway? There's a saying now passed from mother to daughter in quiet kitchens. Speak even if the world would burn you for it. You whisper it to yourself and the fire does not answer, but it listens. You hear the scream before the fire, before the hoofbeats, before the sky goes black with smoke. It starts as a whisper, one merchant telling another one God, rushing past your stall. But within moments, the entire city of Baghdad pulses like a drumbeat of panic. The Mongols are at the gates, and this time no silver, no scribe, no scholar's scroll will stop them. You run through alleys lined with booksellers and bead merchants wondering how the most brilliant city on earth could be brought so low by a rumor riding on horse sweat. You live near the market district, close enough to the House of Wisdom to smell ink and parchment on dry days. You've never stepped inside entries for men in robes and those with titles before their names, but you've stared through its doors. You've seen the shelves that spiral to the ceiling, the script that dances like fire across gold leaf, the globes with stars etched in silver lines. You believed the knowledge could shield a city, until today, because the sky is thickening with more than just smoke. It's fear, dense, breathless. It's 1258, and the Abbasid Caliphate's capital, Baghdad, isn't merely a city. It is the brain of the known world. The House of Wisdom has made it so. For centuries, scribes here have translated. Aristotle preserved Persian astronomy, calculated distances between planets, and built tools to measure time itself. They don't just worship God here. They dissect his designs. And now all that thinking might as well be parchment left out in a monsoon, because the Mongols who fear neither plague nor prayer are coming, and they do not knock. You heard tales of Hulagu Khan's other conquests. Cities burned to their foundations, libraries turned into barracks fields salted, so nothing could regrow. Still, people here thought Baghdad was different, too enlightened to be destroyed, too beautiful to be razed. But beauty isn't armor. Enlightenment doesn't stop a spear, and in the shadow of a galloping army even the wise beg. The Caliph hesitated. Now it's too late. Siege engines groaned like demons outside the walls. Stones the size of oxen crashed through minarets. You duck behind a toppled fruit cart as a flaming bolt sets the roof of the mosque ablaze. People scream not in prayer, but in pain. The city falls faster than you imagined, not in weeks, but in days. The soldiers inside were never ready, and neither were you. When the Mongols breach the gates, the killing starts immediately. There are no proclamations, no negotiations, no mercy. They kill everyone. Scholars in robes, women clutching infants, blind old men trying to offer coins. You duck into a linen shop, hide under spools of embroidered cloth, your nose filled with dust and dye. You hold your breath, count the seconds. Outside, a child calls for her mother. The call never comes again. Mainstream historians agree that the sack of Baghdad in 1258 was one of the most devastating events of the medieval world. Hulagu Khan's army, numbering nearly 150,000 by some accounts, executed the Caliph al-Mustasim, massacred an estimated 200,000 to 800,000 residents, and laid waste to the intellectual heart of the Islamic world. The Tigris ran red with blood, and later black with ink. The House of Wisdom, once the center of global scholarship, was methodically looted. Books were ripped from shelves, their bindings destroyed, their pages tossed into the river. Contemporary observers wrote that the Tigris flowed so thick with ink from the manuscripts that the water turned black. It wasn't metaphor. It was massacre. You'd heard ink could last 1,000 years, but in that moment it barely survived an hour. You creep out once the fires burn low. The city is silent, not peacefully, but completely. You pass corpses curled like sleeping children, piles of books, pages fluttering in the heat. One lies open, a poem in Persian script, ruined by soot. A physician's diagram of the heart has been used to light a torch. You find a board nailed to a door with words scrawled in Latin. All that was known is lost. Some try to fight back. Ragged survivors with kitchen knives and broken swords. But they are crushed quickly, brutally. A man you once saw lecturing on celestial movement now lies headless beside a smashed astrolabe. You don't cry. You don't blink. You just walk. The Mongols don't stay long. They burn, they break, and they leave. But what they took isn't just food or gold or even lives. What they took was potential. The House of Wisdom had contained ancient Greek texts, lost to the West early Arabic advances in optics and medicine texts on geometry, and biology centuries ahead of their time. Historians still debate exactly what was destroyed, but they agree science itself staggered that day. You find your way to the river. The banks are lined with ruined volumes. Some float bloated and soft ink melting into illegible streams. Others have sunk, their knowledge buried. A scholar you recognize wades waist deep trying to fish them out, crying out verses as they vanish under the current. You watch him shout the last line of a poem into the wind and let go. Scholars still argue whether this moment marked the true end of the Islamic Golden Age or merely accelerated a decline already begun. Some say Baghdad would have fallen anyway to rot or to faction. Others insist the flame could have reignited had Hulagu not doused it in blood. But one truth is clear. No city ever replaced Baghdad in mind spirit or ink. You return home, though home feels like a wrong word now. The shop is gone. Your neighbor's gone. The mosque just scaffolding and echoes. You light a candle with hands that still shake and begin to write. Not to remember, but to resist. You scratch letters into fragments of papyrus on the backs of discarded sacks, anything. You write the names of herbs, the rhythm of prayer, a verse about a falcon on the wind. You write because silence is the enemy now. Weeks pass. The invaders disappear into legend. The city rebuilds in fits and starts, but the old world is gone. A boy comes to you with a damaged text, its cover-scorched spine torn. He asks you to read it. You do, slowly, carefully. Each word feels like stitching a wound. Years later, when you're older, children ask you what Baghdad was like before the fire. You don't speak of gold or palaces or feasts. You speak of books, of rooms so quiet that you could hear a page turn across a marble floor, of voices that sang in numbers and ideas, of a city where you could learn not just what the stars were, but what they meant. They ask if it could ever come back. You say it must, because what's buried can grow again, if someone remembers where to dig. The air bites before it touches you, thin and dry and sharp, like walking into breath that was never meant for lungs. Every step crunches underfoot, snow hardened over centuries, hiding secrets beneath the crust of wind. You're alone now, high in the Alps, far above the valleys where bells ring and bread bakes. Up here the world is stripped of color and sound, just white and gray and the low whisper of memory. You feel it before you see it, a shape in the ice, small, dark, out of place, a ripple in time, frozen in place. You kneel, brush away snow, leather, then skin, then hair. Your heart stutters. This isn't a fallen hiker or an old climber lost in a storm. The tools beside him are stone. The tunic is grass fiber stitched with care. This body has not died recently. He's been waiting for 300 years. Ötzi, they'll call him, the Iceman. But for now, he is just a man who died alone in the cold, curled like a question at the top of the world. He was discovered in 1991 not by archaeologists, but by 2 German tourists walking off the trail between Austria and Italy. At first they thought he was a lost climber, but his belongings, copper axe, flint blade, grass cape, told a deeper story. Soon the scientists arrived, and history shifted. This wasn't just a body. It was a messenger. From a time before writing, before cities, before kingdoms, a man carved out of prehistory. Mainstream historical analysis confirms Ötzi lived around 3300 BCE during the Chalcolithic, or Copper Age. His remains are the oldest known naturally mummified human ever discovered in Europe. What makes him extraordinary is not just his age, but how much he brought with him. His clothing tools, tattoos, even the contents of his stomach were preserved. A man frozen in time offering scientists a rare glimpse into the daily life of prehistoric Europe. You imagine him walking those same mountains, bow slung over his back, leather shoes stuffed with straw. His meals were simple bread made from einkorn, wheat goat meat, possibly berries. His cloak was layered animal hide and grass fiber, sewn together with sinew. You wonder if he ever imagined he'd be found, that his last breath would echo 5,000 years forward into a world of satellites and steel. But how did he die? That question would gnaw at scholars for decades. At first it seemed natural hypothermia, a fall exposure. But deeper scans told another tale. An arrowhead lodged in his left shoulder, cuts on his hands, signs of a blow to the head. It was murder, likely sudden, perhaps from behind. Historians still debate the motive robbery revenge ritual. We'll never know. But what's clear is that Ötzi didn't lie down to sleep. He collapsed, wounded, alone. Quirky details emerge with each scan. He had tattoos, over 60 of them made from ash, and carved into the skin, possibly for medicinal purposes. Not symbols of rank or status, but treatment. Early acupuncture. Some scientists think so. His shoes, once laughed at, are now praised for their design, better suited for mountain travel than modern boots. Even his axe, made from nearly pure copper, rewrites the timeline for European metallurgy. This man wasn't a wandering savage. He was sophisticated, skilled, and deeply human. You walk further up the slope and look back at where he lay. How long did he crawl before he fell? Did he know he was dying? Was he pursued? Did he whisper a name before the snow swallowed it? Or did the wind erase it all before it even reached the ice? You picture him limping through fog, knowing the end was near, but too proud to kneel. Historians still argue whether Ötzi was a warrior, a shaman, a chieftain, or a nobody. Some say the copper axe marks him as important. Others point to the wounds he was hunted, not honored. The truth, as always, likely lies in between. He was a man, no more, no less. But in being found, he became more than himself. He became a story the earth held for 5 millennia, waiting for the right day to let it go. You return to the museum where his body now rests, sealed behind glass, climate-controlled and watched by cameras. Tourists shuffle by whispering. Some press fingers to the glass. Others avert their eyes. You lean closer. His skin, darkened by age and altitude, still looks leathery. His lips are pulled back, not in a scream, not in a smile, just silence. A face that outlived empires. A schoolchild asks her teacher if he was sad when he died. The teacher hesitates, then says, "We don't know." But you feel the weight of it, the loneliness, the betrayal, the cold, the hope maybe that someone would find him, someone would remember. You want to tell the girl he wasn't sad. He was brave. He kept walking. In the gift shop, they sell replicas of his axe plastic bow kits, mugs with I Ötzi on them. You feel a pang he died in pain, and now he's a souvenir. But then you see a notebook filled with children's sketches. Ötzi climbing mountains. Ötzi fighting wolves. Ötzi smiling under a sun drawn in crayon. Maybe that's how memory works. Not through reverence, through reinvention. You step outside and feel the sun on your face. It is warm, alive. You think of how short your own steps are compared to his journey through time. And you wonder if you vanished today, what would they find on you? A phone, a receipt, a key with no lock. What story would you leave behind? And would it be enough? Back home, you light a fire and wrap yourself in a wool blanket. You stare into the flames and think of Ötzi's last hours, not with horror, but with awe. Because even in death he survived. Not in myth, but in muscle, in mitochondria, in the quiet hum of ice melting off memory. And now the stories are finished. The fire has dimmed to a hush, the ink has dried. The footsteps have quieted on the cold stone floor. You've walked through fear and fire famine, and frost through wedding chambers, battlefields and frozen mountaintops. But all those echoes of brides and silence of libraries, lost to ash of voices once heard through centuries of snow, begin to soften as if wrapped gently in sleep. They're still there, of course, still waiting. But for now, they no longer ask to be remembered so urgently. They nod and fade. Outside, your window night has curled itself around the world. You feel its weight not as dread, but as a kind of mercy. The same kind felt by those who survived, who rebuilt, who copied what little they could remember from ruined pages and passed it on. And now you carry those fragments too, not as burden, but as belonging. You are part of the chain now, the one that links one whispered tale to the next, one ember to another. Breathe. Deeper now. The darkness doesn't need to be chased away. It is the ink upon which dreams are written. Let it hold you. Let it slow your heart. Let it remind you that every soul, even the ones long buried under snow or soot or sorrow, deserves a quiet rest and a final word. The fire flickers. The page turns. The world sleeps. And so do you. The morning mist clears, but the darkness that once covered the world lingers in stories, records, and tree rings. Long before you were ever born, long before any church bells rang across your village, there was a year without light. A year when the sky grew dim, the sun refused to shine, and people thought the world might be ending. It was the year 535 AD, and something had gone terribly wrong. Across the Byzantine Empire, scribes wrote of a strange, unending gloom. The sun gave forth its light without brightness, one historian wrote, like the moon during the whole year. Crops failed. Snow fell in summer. People panicked, and rightly so. For nearly 18 months, the earth seemed cloaked in a veil of cold gray silence. What caused it? Historians and climate scientists now believe that a massive volcanic eruption, possibly Mount Krakatoa in what is now Indonesia, unleashed an ash cloud so vast, it wrapped the globe in shadow. It wasn't just the eruption's blast, but the sulfur and ash it pushed into the stratosphere, blocking sunlight and triggering years of cooling. Some believe it marks the start of what came to be called the late antique Little Ice Age. You can imagine it, can't you? A medieval village like yours, but even earlier. Farmers waking to frost in midsummer. Mothers with no grain to grind children squinting at the sky, wondering why the days never seemed to brighten. The stars came out early. The crops came late. The hunger came quickly. What would you do if daylight failed? You might gather at the church and pray louder, or cling tighter to old folk charms whispering to the land for mercy. Perhaps the people of 535 did both, mixing psalms with pagan mutterings, desperate for warmth, for clarity, for food. The famine that followed killed millions. Droughts were reported in China. In Ireland, a mysterious failure of bread was recorded in the annals. Even the great city of Constantinople grew quiet, markets thinned, and the emperor's court took on an eerie stillness. Light had become a luxury, firewood a treasure. There are no bedtime tales about this time, no happy songs, just the cold, the gray, the hunger, and the fear. What scholars still debate is the scale of the eruption itself. Some suggest it was Krakatoa. Others think it may have been a massive volcanic chain. Ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica preserved the sulfuric fingerprints of the blast, but no single volcano has ever claimed certainty. The darkness remains in more ways than one, yet something stirs in the aftermath. After the worst of the cooling, new patterns of life begin to emerge. Forests regrow where farms had failed. Survivors shift their calendars, alter their diets, adjust their rituals. The world did not end. It simply changed. You glance at your hearth fire as you listen to this story, and suddenly the warmth seems brighter. The sun beyond your window seems generous, not routine. You picture a girl like you long ago, standing in a shadowed field, her face turned upward, waiting for a sky that never clears. And you realize sometimes, history isn't about kings or battles. Sometimes it's about clouds, about nights that don't end, about hunger that stretches across empires. Sometimes it's about how we survive the dark. You're sitting in a quiet corner of your imagined medieval cottage embers, humming in the hearth and a chill coiling just behind the stones of the wall. Outside, a rooster stirs but doesn't crow. It's that hushed moment before the world picks itself up again. And as your eyes drift shut, lulled by the glow of fire and the soft scratch of wool on your skin, you're drawn slowly, almost dreamlike, into a world that once stood taller than any other. A world of marble columns, golden eagles, disciplined legions, and whispered conspiracies behind velvet curtains. Rome. But not the Rome you imagine from schoolbook glory, not the one of triumphant generals and roaring crowds in the Colosseum. No, this Rome is tired, faded, splintered like a bone that healed crooked, and the final blow comes not with a bang, but with a boy. His name is Romulus Augustulus, and he was barely a teenager. It's the year 476 AD. The once mighty Western Roman Empire is a shadow of its former self. For centuries, the empire has been crumbling, not from one cataclysmic event, but from 1,000 tiny cuts. Corruption, civil war, economic collapse, and foreign invasions that stretched its military to a snapping point. Barbarians aren't at the gates. They're already inside, living in the villas, commanding the armies, marrying into old Roman families. By the time young Romulus is placed on the throne, nobody's fooled. He's not a ruler. He's a placeholder. His father, Orestes, is the real power behind the curtain, a seasoned military commander who installs his son more as a puppet than a prince. The boy's very name is an Echo Romulus, the mythical founder of Rome and Augustus, the first true emperor. It's symbolic, intentional, and doomed. You picture him, this boy emperor, not in a grand golden hall, but in a drafty, half-abandoned palace in Ravenna, the crumbling capital of a shrinking empire. The mosaics still gleam, but the courtiers are few. The robes are patched. The feasts are smaller. The empire still pretends it stretches from Britannia to North Africa, but in truth it's lost most of its limbs. The provinces are gone. The legions are thin. Even Rome itself, ancient eternal Rome, is just a ceremonial shadow looted by the Visigoths decades earlier, scarred and sullen. Then comes Odoacer, a Germanic chieftain, a general in the Roman army, charismatic, shrewd, and tired of waiting. When Orestes denies land to Odoacer's soldiers, something snaps. Odoacer marches on Ravenna, defeats Orestes in battle, and captures the young emperor. But instead of killing Romulus, he does something stranger. He lets him live. He deposes the boy with quiet formality, sends the imperial insignia eastward to Constantinople, and retires the title. No grand declaration, no ceremonial destruction, just a surrender of pretense. The Western Roman Empire, after nearly 5 centuries, ends not with a scream but a sigh. You wonder what that boy thought sitting in a cold room as strangers packed away the symbols of power. Did he cry? Did he understand? Did he try to cling to the marble pillars as they led him out? Or was he just relieved to no longer wear shoes, 2 sizes too big for the role he'd never grown into? He's given a villa, a pension. He disappears from the historical record. The empire disappears too. Mainstream historical fact confirms that the deposition of Romulus Augustulus marks the conventional end of the Western Roman Empire. Yet most scholars now agree that by the time of his removal, the empire was already functionally dead. What Odoacer ended was the illusion. The machinery had stopped turning long ago. It's fascinating, isn't it? That something so vast, so foundational could conclude so quietly. No flaming cities. No final battle, just a boy emperor replaced by a soldier who no longer cared for titles. And the people, they adjusted, because they had to. After the fall, Italy didn't collapse into chaos. Administration continued. Roads remained, though they slowly decayed. Grain still moved from field to town. Laws were enforced, albeit by different hands. Life in the post-Roman world became a patchwork of new rulers, old customs, and an aching nostalgia for order. That nostalgia would echo for centuries. The Holy Roman Empire, Charlemagne, the Renaissance. All would look backward, trying to reclaim what quietly slipped away. But if you'd been a peasant during that time, you might not have noticed any grand change at all. The tax collector might wear different colors, but he'd still knock on your door. The bishop would still preach in Latin. The harvest still had to come in, and the rain still came late. For most, history doesn't announce itself. It just happens, and we adapt. Back in your cottage, the fire flickers. You run your hand along the grain of the table worn by years of elbows and candle wax. You think about Romulus, the boy who bore a world's name and shrugged it off like a too-heavy cloak. There's something haunting about it. Something comforting, too, because it means the end of a world isn't always the end of everything. You rise, stretch, and pour another ladle of broth into your wooden cup. The broth is thin but warm. It does the job. You stare into its steam and imagine the boy emperor, all those centuries ago, warming his hands over a brazier as he watched courtiers pack away his throne. He was just a boy. He never expected to become the last. And history, it turns out, rarely needs applause to change the stage. You hear it before you feel it. Rain. Again. Not a summer shower, not the rhythmic tap of a passing cloud, but a relentless, unyielding drumbeat against thatch soil and bone. It's the kind of rain that sours grain in the field, that blackens bread dough, left too long on the windowsill. The kind of rain that doesn't wash away sin or sorrow. It simply soaks it deeper into the ground. It's May 1315, and it will rain for months. At first, no one panics. Rain is a fact of life, a blessing in moderation. Too much sun is worse, they say. Crops need water. But by June, the village paths are a slurry of mud. By July, your father is pacing in the barn, squinting up at rafters that drip even indoors. By August, the oat fields are stunted. The barley lies flat. And the wheat. The wheat never stood a chance. You've never seen adults this nervous. You remember the first bad harvest. There was silence at dinner, less bread on the table, salted pork usually served in thick slabs shaved down to strips. Your mother said it would pass. The Lord tests us, she whispered, but her hands were shaking when she said it. Then came the second bad harvest, and suddenly everything changed. The Great Famine of 1315-1317 was not the work of war or plague. It was water, cold, constant, and cruel. Beginning with unseasonably heavy spring rains, much of northern Europe experienced crop failure on a catastrophic scale. Fields flooded, roads washed out, harvests rotted. And across the continent, hunger set in with claws and teeth. In your village, the signs were subtle at first. Less grain at market, eggs vanishing quickly, chickens kept behind doors instead of wandering freely. Your neighbors stopped offering milk. Another family slaughtered their goat early. And then, one by one, the dogs began to disappear. You don't want to ask. Even the nobles, those towering silhouettes of wealth and power, felt it. Their stores, larger but finite, dwindled. Their peasants, overworked and underfed, collapsed in the fields. Food prices tripled. And bread, the one constant, the one thing always promised, became rare. You remember the day your mother handed you a crust and said, "Eat slowly. There won't be more." You did. You chewed like it was gold. By the second winter, the hunger became something else. Not just a lack, but a presence. A pressure in your chest. A spinning in your head. People looked thinner, grayer. The priest stopped preaching about sin and started talking about patience. The Lord gives, the Lord takes, he said. But it was harder to listen when your stomach screamed louder than his sermons. Then came spring and more rain. The ground couldn't absorb it. The rivers swelled. Grain mold bloomed across what few sacks remained. Even rats, once detested, became baited, hunted, cooked. You watched a woman, someone's aunt, boil grass in a pot and pretend it was stew. You didn't laugh. Mainstream historical accounts confirm that the Great Famine led to widespread starvation, disease, and social disruption. Chroniclers of the time spoke of bodies lining roadsides of theft, becoming necessity of cannibalism whispered about in hushed, horrified tones. Entire regions saw population declines. Children were abandoned. Elders were left behind. Families were broken by the simple math of survival. And still it rained. Scholars still argue about what caused the strange weather pattern. Some believe it was part of a larger climatic event, the early tremors of the Little Ice Age. Others suspect volcanic activity altering atmospheric patterns. But no one disputes the scale. Between 10 and 25% of the population in affected areas may have died. You remember the funeral bells ringing every other day? Not for war heroes, just neighbors, friends, infants who never cried, elders who didn't wake, a man who went into the woods and didn't return. When they found him, his face was turned to the sky, eyes open, mouth full of leaves. You began to dream of bread, not just taste it in your sleep, but smell it thick, warm, crusted with ash. You'd wake up with your fingers in your mouth, chewing nothing. People began to travel, looking for food, for rumors of fields less wet. Roads became dangerous bandits. Sickness, desperation. You met a boy from 2 villages away who traded a wooden comb for a turnip. I had sisters, he said, then walked away. The famine lasted 2.5 years. That doesn't sound like much. But count every meal you didn't have. Every day you woke up wondering what could be chewed, boiled, swallowed. Count every glance from a friend that felt too hungry. Every dream that ended with a crust. It is an eternity. And when the rains finally stopped, when the sun returned cautious and pale, the world wasn't the same. There were fewer of you. Fields lay fallow. Songs were quieter. Even festivals felt wrong, like the laughter was borrowed. Yet somehow the plow turned again. Barley sprouted. A child was born. A loaf was shared without a lie. And just as the land began to heal, the ships arrived. The year was 1347, and death came faster than ever before. But that's another story. You sip your broth. You press your palm against your belly full for now. And you say a quiet thanks to a field that grew something this season. Because once not so long ago it didn't. And now the stories are finished. The fire has dimmed to a hush, the ink has dried. The footsteps have quieted on the cold stone floor. You've walked through fear and fire famine, and frost through wedding chambers, battlefields and frozen mountaintops. But all those echoes of brides and silence of libraries, lost to ash of voices once heard through centuries of snow, begin to soften as if wrapped gently in sleep. They're still there, of course, still waiting. But for now, they no longer ask to be remembered so urgently. They nod and fade. Outside, your window night has curled itself around the world. You feel its weight not as dread, but as a kind of mercy. The same kind felt by those who survived, who rebuilt, who copied what little they could remember from ruined pages and passed it on. And now you carry those fragments too, not as burden, but as belonging. You are part of the chain now, the one that links one whispered tale to the next, one ember to another. Breathe deeper now. The darkness doesn't need to be chased away. It is the ink upon which dreams are written. Let it hold you. Let it slow your heart. Let it remind you that every soul, even the ones long buried under snow or soot or sorrow, deserves a quiet rest and a final word. The fire flickers. The page turns. The world sleeps. And so do you.